And welcome to another exciting adventure on the energy that surrounds us. I'm your host, Michael, and thank you all for joining us on this special episode on a special day. And I have a truly awesome guest that I am so excited for you all to hear from. And I was going to say talk to, but unfortunately, I'm the only one that can talk to you right now, being on screen, but. That's going to be a fun episode. I can tell now where my mind is going. So, before I completely ramble this episode off into who knows where, I'm going to hand it off to my amazing guest to introduce herself to you all. I give you the one, the only experiencer extraordinaire, Sharon Day.
Oh, thank you. It's an interesting title. Try to live up to that. I can tell you that I am a screenwriter and producer, and I'm also an author of about 2 dozen books. I'm a researcher before everything else, and that's why I have the site ghosthuntingtheories.com. And that's where I sort of explore everything unexplained and then come up with like some different ways of looking at things. Some people go in the front door, I go in a window. I look at everything that's unexplained in a different attitude, partly science, partly skeptic, and a great deal of intuitive. And so it's led to Ghost Hunting Theories being the number one ghost hunting site in the world. And I cover every subject paranormal. It's an obsession.
So, did this obsession start with something when you were a child, or did you just have a natural curiosity, or what got you to go, aha, this
Yeah.
is the field I want to go into?
Well, it was a perfect storm, actually. I was born into a Civil War hospital home and grew up, digging up relics. The place was considered one of the most haunted houses, and it truly was extremely active. And since I was a baby when I moved in there, I thought that was normal. That's just the way life is. That there's a few different ways of, like you don't question what wind is. I didn't question what an apparition was. It was just part of the house. So I had a different attitude than most. And then digging up relics and being there, the wood floors were stained with the blood of both the North and South had used it as a hospital. So it did something to me, I think, because I, from a young age, had a very strong psychic talent for psychometry. Seeing an object and knowing about the others who had handled that object. And so, as a child, I would watch activity in the house peak and then drop, and I began to question why. Why now? Why would this month is it quiet when last month it was insane? So I started keeping a notebook. I was maybe like 10 years old. I'm keeping a notebook of activity and trying to find commonalities. So really, it started there, but throughout my life, it led into other things, encounters with aliens, witnessing Bigfoot, lots of UFO stuff. My psychic talents expanded into pretty much all of the arena. And so I have a lot of questions. I'm always asking why, how does this happen? And I'm one of those people that just wants to lift the curtain and see what's behind it.
Oh, that's amazing. And, you really piqued my interest when you mentioned, the house you grew up in was a hospital for both the Union and the Confederate, because in all my studying of like the Civil War, I don't think I ever came across a location where both sides used it for the same thing. And so
Yeah.
I'm wondering, is there something unique to the land there that
Mhm.
both sides used it as a hospital? Because that seems awfully rare.
I think it was more strategic. This was in Fairfax, Virginia, just outside of D.C. First, the Union took it over from a Quaker family that was living there. And that led me to believe later on, as growing up there, that since Quakers lived there, there had to be an underground railroad. And I did find a secret room within the center of the house. And so it explained a lot about the energy of the place. You had very peaceful and protective and loving people that were there. Then you had the union come in and sort of, seize it. In fact, the union built a fort on the property. And so there was a lot of fighting going on, which when I was digging up relics, I found, tons of cannonballs, tons of bullets, bayonets, all kinds of stuff. It was obviously had a lot of activity. But at some point, I guess moving their lines up and down, the South claimed it for the same thing. And it was a really good location, big old mansion up on a hill, but it was strategically, it was good. But the house itself was intriguing because it sat atop of a stream with a stone basement, and it just seemed to have all the right qualities to be what I'd call a spirit vessel. So it sort of held information. It became a place that everything goes back to. In fact, my family had made a vow that we would all haunt the place. And we moved out when I was in my late high school. We moved out west. But one by one, my family members died rather young. And there's been reports of them there at the house. In fact, a contractor bought the mansion and wanted to tear everything down and build condos. And they wouldn't let him because it was historically protected. And so they had to keep the mansion there, but they tore down like the outbuildings and the stable, the barn. They plowed over the creek and, all this, no archaeologist on site. And he built condos that surround the mansion now. It's called Aspen Grove. And what happened was I got a notice from somebody. Now, I wrote a book called Growing Up with Ghosts. And I had, over the years, I knew I'd be a writer. And so I had kept the accounts my family had of their ghost encounters, our collective encounters, and then how they reacted, because each member acted differently toward the ghost thing. Some were very afraid, some were protective, some were intrigued. So I had written this book, and a woman had bought a condo on the property, and she contacted me and she said, I have a question. Was there ever a fire on the property? And so I went on to Google Earth and I made an X on the property where the union had built. Later on, when the Quaker family moved back in, which was like 7 women and 1 man after the war, they had taken the fort and used it as a kitchen, because usually it was safer to have a kitchen away from the main house. And that did catch fire at one point. And so I put the X on the map, and she said, that's exactly where my condo. So she gave me a picture. Here's my condo. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. Well, why do you want to know if there was a fire? And she said, we just moved in, and my son woke up. My son woke up crying, and he was crying about a fire. And she said his hands had blisters all over them. So she went into the bathroom to get stuff to put on the burns, and when she came back, they were gone. And so she had to wonder, okay, she didn't know that the place was known to be haunted. I mean, it had been on NBC specials. It had been in the Washington Post, the Washington Star, all the local papers. It was constantly being barraged for the ghosts, but somehow she didn't know that it was a haunted land. So then she contacted me again, and she said, do you know about a ghost of a black man in tattered clothing? And I said, yeah, there was one right outside of where that burned kitchen was. And he was seen often by visitors would come, they'd drive up the long driveway and they'd park and they'd look over, and there's this man looking very bewildered. And that ghost was very familiar. And it was actually right beside where her condo was. And I guess the neighbor next to her kept seeing this man in their yard. So some things seemed to just stay very local. But what was interesting is my family had vowed that they would haunt the place. When my sister had gotten married on the property, and we had this big wedding, and there was boxwood mazes, and within the boxwood maze we had like all the caterers and everybody, wandering around, drinking champagne and celebrating. And she loved that. That was her favorite place on the property. And so when we said, well, haunted, she always said, that's where I'll be. Well, the woman with the son that had the burned hands, well, a couple of years later, she contacted me and she said, my son's friend had been out in the boxwood maze, and they said they keep seeing a woman in white, and they think she's a ghost. And I said, oh, intriguing. And she said, well, I decided it was time to tell him that the place is haunted. So she gave him my book, and he flipped through the book, and he saw my sister with the auburn hair and the wedding gown. And him and his friend both went, that's the lady. That's her. That's her. So apparently, I guess the family has arrived there.
No, that's a really beautiful story, and that's really cool that they're there, and it just goes to show when we say things, that there is if there's intention behind it,
Mhm.
we can make it reality, and it seems like that's exactly what your sister did. And I'm
Mhm.
kind of a little bit curious to know, and you may have been asked this before, but growing up in the haunted house that you did and experiencing everything, what impacts did that have on you growing up? Were you like the child that like everybody was like, "Oh, she's the ghost girl, don't go near her," or people accepting of it?
Okay, so since I can remember being in grade school and NBC did like a 2 hour special on the ghosts, and the teacher announced it to the class. I just wanted to sink in my seat because the the mansion had 7 acres and forests around it, but then all around that was tract housing suburbs, and so everyone was scared of the place, and they would dare each other to like get on the property or go through the boxwood mazes, or just see how close you can get to the house. And so it was kind of awkward. I always felt ashamed and embarrassed. I'm in this house with antiques and showcases of artifacts. It's on the historical tour. People are making articles about the ghosts, and it was just it made me feel really ashamed. And then as I got older, I realized that it actually formed a very complex and interesting person. The kids in the tract house, what do they say? You know, they skateboarded outside. They didn't really have any kind of like the history, the ties to history, and then having the psychic abilities, the ties to the people that passed there. And that was another thing I had developed, was I guess, kind of a connection with the people that actually passed there and how they passed. And it was very vivid, and I still feel like I carry some link to them, and I always will, because I recognize them.
Very cool. And so, do you feel like all the stuff that you've been exposed to later in life, you're more open to because they helped you as a child and helped you develop the gifts to kind of guide you along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of compare it to meditation. If you meditate regularly, you can go to this peaceful attitude, and you can calm down all of your vital signs, and you can be receptive. And when you've learned to see things that others aren't seeing, or hear, or sense, or know things that others don't know, uh, that pathway's open. And so you can be aware. Something's present. You can probe what's present, figure it out. The encounters that I said that I've had with the alien grays throughout my life, those were what they call mind speak. And mind speak's exactly like being psychic. If I read someone, I'm not hearing the words in their head or what they're thinking. I'm knowing what they know, and that's what mind speak. Alien contact. There's no spoken language, but they give you information like a zip file, and you sort of open that up, and now you know what they know. You put it in your own words because you speak English, or you like to use certain words, but you totally get the gist of what they're sending you.
No, that's amazing. And
Yeah.
I kind of am curious because everyone, experiences everything differently.
Hmm.
And you said you would see these apparitions.
Hmm.
The first time you saw an apparition, were you like the typical child that's like screaming and like freaking out and going, "Oh my God, what is this?" Or were you just like, "Hey, how's it going?"
Yeah, you kind of, I mean, you get to know them. It's kind of like if you have a house and you have a hallway and you have pictures of your family, you walk past them all the time. You don't really think about it because they're pictures of your family. You don't have to get excited about it. But I do have, I think, because I was a baby going into the place, my older siblings, they knew about ghosts. They were much older than me, and they knew the place was haunted, and they didn't know what to think of it. So my mom and dad sat them down and they said, "Look, there's soldiers that died here They were away from their family. And now there's here in this house, and there's 5 children. And who better to protect you than a dad and a soldier dad? And so that quieted my siblings. Now, to me, voices, hearing conversations, watching objects move, it was very normal. One of my earliest memories, I was probably like 3. I actually have memories back to when I was 1. But when I was about 3, I was sitting on an oriental rug at my mom's feet. And my mom was a historian. And she would sit in this chair, smoke a cigarette, and go through tons of books and papers that we would get at City Hall and the library. And she was uncovering the history of the house. So she's sitting there with a newspaper, and I'm humming, and I'm playing with Hot Wheels on the floor. And then all of a sudden, I look up in the ashtray that Mom, back in the 60s, the ashtrays had little troughs where the cigarettes sat. Her cigarette went cartwheeling and landed about 6 feet away. And I just watched it. I stopped humming. So my mom was like, "What's going on?" She lowered the newspaper. She looked down at the ashtray, then she looked around. She saw the cigarette. She got up and got it, and she said, "Oh, it did it again." Like, to her, it was normal. So her reaction made me think, yeah, sometimes things move on their own. And we did have a lot of object movement in the house. It was really interesting. And I think that also made me want to investigate when I got older, because all I want to know is why. Why now? How did it do that? What's doing that? Is it a ghost? Is it energy? Is it...
Sorry, the trashman just went by.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm kind of curious, and I know this is like an objective question, and it may be hard to answer, but is there a particular experience or a particular moment growing up in that house that you're like, this was my favorite moment? This is the moment I don't ever want to forget. I just like, this was my great awesome moment.
Yeah. Well, I have 2 of those. One was good and one was bad. So everything that happened there, and I counsel a lot of people that are in actively haunted places. And one of my, great advice is, did it just startle you? Did it actually threaten you? You have to kind of keep, and I tell them, keep a notebook, because the more you narc on the ghost, you feel like you're in control. And you also start to learn things about it, it takes the fear out of it. But when I was a little girl, I had Hong Kong flu. My temperature went up to, 104, 105. And my mom was preparing a bath of ice, which was the wrong thing to do. It sent me into shock. But I was laying there in the bed, and I remember just turning and calling for my mom, but she was down the hall. The water was running. And there was this elderly woman beside me. She was all hobbled over. She had like a shawl. And she had her hair in a bun, and she was sort of stroking my forehead. And I just, I was just so thankful. I felt so comforted, and I felt relief, like my fever had broken. I wasn't shivering anymore. I was calm. And then my mom came in the room, and I said, "Thank you for petting me." And my mom's like, "What are you talking about?" Well, a long time after that, when my mom had passed away, I inherited, because I'm like the youngest of the family, so I'm the historian. She left me a box of photographs. And in the photographs, there was a photograph from the 1865, after the war, when the Quaker family moved back in the house. And I had all the 7 women and the 1 man. The man had only 1 arm, which is another one we used to see in the hallway, 1 arm. But she left me that, and I looked at it, and there was a woman in a wheelchair, an elderly woman with a shawl and her hair in a bun. And I'm like, that's the woman. So I was actually able to narrow down that the 1-armed man that walked, he was more like a silhouette. He would walk down the hallway and disappear into the end bedroom. So I knew who that guy was, and I knew who she was. And I just felt so, how people with near-death experiences say they feel absolute love and relief. When that woman stroked my forehead, it was euphoric. I didn't have a body. I didn't have any troubles. I was loved. I was protected. It was an amazing feeling. But the only time when living there that I ever got scared, and I got really scared, we were preparing to move out, and we had set up the old-fashioned TV trays. You sit in front of the sofa, you unfold the legs, and you got this TV tray. We had one with a pickle jar of coins. We had a bunch of paper rolls, and we were rolling quarters. And so the quarters were stacked or no, actually it was pennies. Yeah, it was pennies. They were stacked in groups of 10 pennies, 10 pennies, 10 pennies. And then the paper rolls were nearby. And so we left it there. We went into the breakfast room, which was on the opposite side of the house from the music room. And my mom and sister and I were talking because my dad and my brother had gone to Arizona to look for a home. And we were talking about the kind of home we want to get. And we want a swimming pool and, orange trees and all this stuff. And we're in the middle of the conversation. We hear this loud crash. And we got up immediately. We ran through the house. We knew exactly where the sound was coming from. And in the music room, what we saw confused my logical mind and made me feel threatened. What had happened was my mom had a picture of I think it was her great or great uncle that was in the Civil War, and that was on the wall. It was a big oval picture, glass front. It had come off the wall. It had hit the TV tray 10 feet away. It was underneath the tray as it had fallen on top of it, and all of the stacks of pennies were still standing. I couldn't understand what was going on. And then the next day, as we walked through the house to carry boxes to where we were going to load them up, the plaster ceilings, all of them just dropped. They just cracked. They all hit the floor, dust everywhere. It was a hot mess. Sometimes in the mornings we'd wake up and some of the boxes would be unpacked. I could just feel the energy was different. It was angry. It was not angry at us, but just angry at the disruption. And one thing I learned about the house was every time someone moved in or out or visited, the activity changed. So the human beings and their very souls are part of the milieu of the house. And so that's why you find a lot of disturbance in houses of mentally broken people or angry people. It creates a kind of a disruption. It changes the energy. And but so when that happened, I went and slept in one of the cottages until we moved. I was scared to go in the house anymore. It went from feeling comforting and protective to like a tantrum.
I'm kind of curious, when you moved out, you say you grew up in the house. How many years were you like actually there? Like, was it like
Uh,
5 years,
no,
12 years?
it was 15 years. Yeah.
Because the reason I ask is, like you're saying, they don't like the change, and doing all this and when you said unpacking, it kind of hit a chord with me, and I was like, I, you know, I don't think they wanted you to leave. Not meaning you were trapped in
Yeah.
the house.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think they just enjoyed growing up with you and were like, no, don't leave us.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And, I noticed other things too. I have two sisters, older sisters that were 10 months apart, and they acted like twins. They either loved or hated each other. And so I would notice that there was a lot of object movement, poltergeist type stuff when they were in their throes. And when they moved out and got married, I was getting into my adolescence. And when I would get upset, things would move. And I carried that ability my whole life, where if I'm suppressing anger, I act like a magnet, kind of metal things come toward me. It's a weird thing. So there's a lot of different mechanics and strange things going on. When it comes to ghosts, you can't say it's all one thing. And you can't even say that a ghost is necessarily one thing. A soul literally can be omnipresent, can be everywhere at once. It doesn't have a body, it doesn't need that locality that we're stuck with. And, if they want to be somewhere, they're there immediately. It's a very quantum world that they move in, being bodiless. So I laugh sometimes when I watch like Ghost Hunters. There was one episode, they went in an attic and they decided we're going to drop flour all over the floor. And if they'll leave footprints, they're not people anymore. They're not visible people. You've got to retrain the way you see it, or even what you think it is. And there's a lot of times where I say, That's just a memory. It's not a ghost. It's not intelligent. It's not active. It's not interacting. And also other times where I say, I don't know that that's from the spirit world. So there's a lot of different things going on at once.
Yeah, and I kind of think, the reason they do the flower test for the footprints is because we hear footprints, so we assume, oh, they manifested
Yeah,
themselves with
yeah,
feet.
yeah. And I on my own side, when I was 10, I was trying to learn about how they work. And every night we had what they said was a soldier with his boots going up the stairs. It did definitely sounded like boots on wood stairs. And so I ended up taking my dad's recorder and trying to record the footsteps. I sat on the steps one night and I turned on the recorder and I sat there. And sure enough, when the steps started, what surprised me was when it stood on the creaking, it creaked the board that I was sitting on, and it stopped. And I'd never heard it stop. It's as if for a moment it thought, is there something here? And I'm thinking, is there something here? Like we recognize each other somehow. Now, I took the recording to school and played it for the kids, and they're all like, oh, you put your dad's boots on. And so at a very young age, I learned I'm not going to be able to prove this to anyone. You either have to live it and experience it, or you just get past wanting to prove it and just learn about it and observe it. So I kind of see myself as like an archivist instead of, and same way with Bigfoot. Once you've seen a Bigfoot, you know they exist. It's not believing in them, it's knowing. But I can't give that to anyone else unless they're out there in the woods and they see it. So I think when we get past the proof of the paranormal, then the really exciting part, the interaction, the experience.
Right. And Fearlessly Phoenixing has a question for you. You kind of somewhat answered, but I'll let you see if you want to answer further. Have you ever noticed, or is it a thing, that place can have multiple hauntings, but that are unaware of each other, like where they are stuck in their own timeline dimensionality of the property?
Mhm. Yeah, I've had to come up with kind of my own take on the whole ghostly. It's more dimensional. Uh, my example is okay, so here I am, and I have a photograph of me. Well, the photograph of me is a two-dimensional portrayal of me, a very split second, maybe just the front of me in just a certain moment of time, and it's only visual. It doesn't have depth, it doesn't have knowledge, it doesn't have any kind of cognition or understanding. It doesn't see our world. It only sees like the lines or dots near it. Um, that's only one dimension jump from that photograph that's a facsimile of one more dimension. Now you have the 3D biologic me that has knowledge, that can move, that has depth. I think when we move on, and near-death experiencers explain this, you enter a whole nother level. You have 360-degree vision. You have that quantum ability to jump from place to place as you think of it. You're pretty much unlimited. I think our problem that we run into trying to understand the ghostly phenomena is we only know it from our viewpoint. So we assume either they don't know they're dead, or they have unfinished business, or they're still walking around looking for their husband who died 100 years ago and they could have met them,
Right.
But so my logical side asks a lot of questions of those sorts of things. And I think when we're dealing with ghosts, we have to stop thinking one person, a very linear, one person, one spirit. It's one person, one energy. And the energy enters like basically the universal broth. It can be everywhere. And so it can represent visually, it can represent sound-wise, any place they want to be, they can be right then. And a really good example. When I was 16, we had moved to Arizona, and a year later, we had moved to Arizona because my dad had heart problems and the cold bothered him. So we moved to Arizona a year later. I was 16. Dad had a heart attack in the house, and paramedics said, we've lost him. There's no signs of life. But we'll keep trying. And so they got the paddles out. They're working on him. About 6 minutes later, Dad came to, and they had signs of life. So they put him on a gurney, and they were rolling him out of the house, and he had them stop. And I looked at my dad, and he had this boyish smile on his face. All of the stress lines were gone. He looked so young and so happy. And he said, I was with Mama and Papa and my Tante Valberg. Now, my dad was from Norway. And he said, there were flowers that don't exist here and colors that don't exist here. And so they started to roll him out. And then he stopped them and he waved to me to come over. And he kept waving for me to lean over like he had a secret. And he said, that was the real world. This one's fake. A few days later, Dad died. I'd come home from the hospital to see him there, and we thought he was doing better. So I went to bed, and I woke up. Somebody was tugging on my big toe. And I look up, and I see my dad's silhouette. It's obviously my dad. My dad had a big belly, and it was definitely Dad. And I thought, wow, he got out of the hospital. And the phone next to me rang. And I went to reach for the phone, and my sister had also picked it up, and I'm listening. And it's the hospital telling us that Dad passed on and to come take care of Mom. And I looked back, Dad was gone. What was interesting about that is I was the last child, and Dad trying to spend more time with me because he was out of his government job, and he was, able to support all my activities and cheer me on. And I hadn't finished growing up yet, that kind of stuff. When I was growing up, he traveled the world all the time. He had very important work he did, and he was gone constantly. And I always worried that he'd get home safe because a few times the planes had like foamed runways and bad stuff. And Mom said, look, she's got to go to school. So Sten, do not wake her up. Because, but he still wanted me to know he got home. So he would come in my room and he would tug on my big toe. And basically he was saying, I made it home. I can't even express. I mean, even with all of my experience with encounters, this was a very humbling thing. It was the most proof of heaven. I guess I'd have to say heaven, whatever this next dimension is. But yeah, he let me know he came home. So I think it's hard for us to perceive, like if the photograph could think, it would be hard for it to perceive, what it's like to be three-dimensional or to think or to be able to go from here to there. It doesn't have space like we do. It doesn't have time like we do. So when you add another dimension, I mean, look at the leap from a photograph to a person. Imagine from the person. We're a facsimile, basically, of what we are on the next dimension. We're a physical facsimile of it. You really have to get back into like quantum physics to figure out how to understand it because we don't have a reference.
No.
All right, and Fearlessly Phoenixing goes on, and he also asked, is that why renovations also cause disturbances in the routine of the property?
Oh, yeah. Everyone that's ever moved into the mansion ended up doing some kind of revisions. I mean, it was built in the 1750s as a fort. So it had a lot of work it needed to get done. And when we moved in, we were like everyone else. We were moving things around. We were, opening up stuff. We added on a couple of rooms. We had a lot of activity with that. Now, I'm also a feng shui specialist, so I can tell you there's a little bit of change in the energy flow. Now, if you have a spiritual energy in the house, and now you're moving things around, you're redirecting the flow. So it's not necessarily there's some ghost that's possessive about the house. They don't need the house. Believe me, they love where they are. They don't live in this world anymore. It's not part of their perception. It's like I don't run around with a photograph of myself all the time, languishing about that moment the photo was taken. We don't do that either. We move on. We really do move on. And I think that's harder for the people that are left here to realize that we're finally out of our prison. Or I guess you could look at it this way. You have an actor, he has a life, he's married, has kids, has a house. He goes to do a play, and he does the play for 3 months. He's pretending in the play. But he still remembers who he is and where his home is. He goes back to it when the play is over. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about here. This is a play, a stage, and then we move on. We remember that we had that play, but it's not who we were before the play, and it's not who we are after the play. It's just something we did.
All right, and I'm kind of curious. You mentioned, alien interactions, and I know everyone's kind of like looking at me and, why did he jump on that? There is a reason.
Yep.
And I'm gonna get into it now. Is with your interactions, you talk about being able to kind of discern alien intentions, and I'm kind of also a little bit curious of your thoughts of a theory that I have of sometimes when we are at locations and we see a shadow, entity moving around, and we naturally go, oh, that's a shadow being or that's a ghost of the property. Could it also be an alien entity that's, checking us out to see, hey, should we make contact with these people, or is this person worth,
Yeah.
how will they react? And so I'm curious if you've ever had that thought.
I actually have my own theory on the shadow people. I don't know that would help a ghost it wouldn't help an alien to dress up in a black outfit and run around. But here's what I think. Let's say you're standing outside and you're hiding from somebody. And so you go around the corner of a building and you hide. But the sun shines on you and casts a two-dimensional shadow of you on the ground. Now, if you were from a higher dimension, you'd have a three-dimensional shadow. And that's why there's no details to this thing. And also why if somebody saw my shadow and they started running toward the corner of the building because they know I'm there, they saw my shadow, I would take off because I'm trying to hide. Now, in their case, they think they're hiding, but when you notice them, they take off. So you're noticing their three-dimensional shadow. So this is like a whole new realm when you look at it that way.
That is, and I like that because it sort of makes sense of a lot of things. And there are times too that I wonder, when we look at, scenarios where, we call them, residual haunts, where somebody is going about their day.
Yeah.
Well, what if that person, we are assuming going about their day like they did when they were here? Well,
Mhm.
we're assuming that they were here. What if we found a veil opening and we're watching a parallel timeline or parallel
Mhm.
universe, and that person is equally stunned to see you, and is why they don't communicate, or just going about their own deal, is that is their actual daily life. But we're
Yeah.
looking at it thinking, oh, you're not actually here, so this has to be residual.
Well, we had a lot of residual type, especially the apparitions. They would go the same path. They would never look at you. They would never recognize you. And I had to ask myself, why is that moment in time captured? Obviously, they're not present in any way, or they would recognize, or they would act differently. They would change their routine, or they would look at you. And so there's something very recorded about that. Now, we do have Earth's electromagnetic fields. And I think what we're finding is there's got to be some conditions in which a moment is sort of recorded in a spot. And then it's released when the same conditions occur. What I've noticed as a ghost hunter, basically, I kept really meticulous notes because once again, I'm trying to find out why. Why is it happening? Well, as a psychic, I know where there's energies. I know what's happening in a building, but my team was not psychically active at all, and they had no clue. Some nights we would leave an investigation, they'd be like, "Oh, that was a bummer. It wasn't active," and I was thinking it was all there. And then other nights they would all come back and they had been touched, their hair had been pulled, they saw something, and they're like, "Wow, that was the ghosts were active." No, the ghosts weren't. All of that stuff's there all the time. And what happens, what I found consistently, 100% of the time, there were geomagnetic storms from solar flares. Now, those actually affect your pineal gland and create very vivid dreams, but they also heighten your psychic abilities. So, people that aren't psychic are suddenly noticing what's always there. It wasn't an active night, they were just a better receiver of what was happening. And I took my team into haunted locations and I would have draw maps of the room and I'd give each person a map. I would go in alone. I would find the energies. I would make an X wherever there was a strong energy. I would come out and I would have the next person go in with divining rods. Wherever the rods cross, they put an X on their map. We would all, at the end of this, unfold our maps, lay them out, exactly the same stuff. So you don't have to be psychic. There's other ways to be able to tell there's an energy in a room. So I had a lot of people that said, well, I'm on the team, but I'm not really good at knowing if there's a ghost. Well, carry some copper divining rods. You'll do it.
I agree. And Source Approved 144 brought up an interesting observation, and they say, I think it's often stored in the energy of the ley lines or the significant building. Do you notice ley lines, having an impact or?
Oh yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I ran into that on the property I grew up on, just following where I had crossovers of rods. They ran in great lines with important buildings like the court, the house, the well, those kinds of things. On ghost hunting theories, I had spent a good deal of time creating what I call the haunted formula, and it was looking for commonalities in the most reportedly haunted locations. The super active. I picked 50 super active locations, and I found what they had in common. And the ones that had, there were 5 qualities, and the ones that had all 5 qualities were very highly reported as haunted. So it seemed to be that if I wanted to go on an investigation in a place that hadn't been investigated yet, I could look for those 5 conditions to see, is it promising? One of them was geology. Another one was that it had to be over 50 years old. If it was over 50 years old, that meant that people had probably died there because they didn't die in hospitals back then. The construction of the building, if it was stone or brick, there was just running water, if there was waterways, and for some reason, railroad tracks. And I had to wonder if that was incidental because generally in the old days, they built towns around railroad depots where they got their goods. So older homes are pretty much going to be near railroads. But then you also have to remember you have iron tracks. So what I found was a certain amount of conductivity. Water when it's moving, especially water that's like a creek where there's like particulates in it, that's more conductive. Different geology is more conductive. And then, of course, the iron tracks were more conductive. So there seems to be a predictability about this. And I think the only place I found that countered that was Tombstone, Arizona. The Birdcage Theater is a wood building, which to me makes it very low likely. But it also has mines, metal mines running right underneath it. So it kind of countered itself in a way. It was more haunted because of the land than the building.
Yeah, and I will agree because I actually went to Tombstone and was walking around, and the energy in Tombstone is like, I don't like to use the word unique, but it is very different from other places. And
Mhm.
some of it, I wonder, is it because you have the natural energy that's there that's
Mhm.
keeping everything, going, and, hauntings can occur with that, and it's keeping itself alive. But the fact that everybody that's living there is also keeping
Yeah.
or is alive. And so it's constantly being fed. And so it's like, hey, this is great. Where you go to other places and they're like, yeah, this happened. And they're like, okay. And then everybody leaves. Well, these people stay.
Yeah, I think a lot of people believe that mining towns, now I had a lot of studies there because I lived there for decades, but people assume a mining town's going to be haunted because it has such a crazy background. A lot of shootings and revenge and anger and, theft and prostitution and all the things that make it seem like how we think jails are haunted too because of the people inside them. Well, in a mining town, you also have the factor of the metals in the ground. And that does, especially during storms, in the copper towns, during storms, it's extremely active. And there's something that is brought to life, an energy that you tap into, maybe even a way to record the past with that. And So jails, not all jails are really haunted. I've been in abandoned jails that did not have the right construction or geology, even though it had just criminals in it and just as much murders and things. So there really seems to be a certain, a haunted formula for that, some kind of a haunted vessel.
I'm kind of curious your thoughts of, like Tombstone, being an example of a town where you get like some homes or buildings that are really haunted, and people are, putting, money into having investigators come. And so they're keeping the story, they're keeping the, legends, the lore, the mythos of it
Yeah.
going. Does that, you know, I kind of have a twofold question on it is, does it keep the energy there and the spirits there going? And also on the flip side, let's say like Tombstone, for example, Wyatt Earp, being, famously, dealings there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, people keep mentioning him and keep bringing him up, or Virgil Earp, and saying,
Yeah.
"Oh, we see Virgil." Does that prevent them from being able to go and do whatever they're wanting to do because they keep getting called back?
No, I
Or
mean, yeah, yeah. I get it. That makes sense, right? But if you really look at it, and you're not talking about having a body, having an energy. I think that what we ultimately learn when we move on is that there is no past, present, and future. There is no space and time. Everything just is. So everything that was, to us, everything that was is still there. It still is, and it always will be. And an example of that is I had a sister, teenage sister, who was a hippie, and she would smoke pot. Mom would find her weed because, well, I might have told mom where it was, but mom would get mad, flush it down the toilet, and then she would lock my sister in her room. And my sister was, she sang like Stevie Nicks, like a goat. She had this trembling song voice. And she would pound on the walls and yodel and just rage in that room. Well, a decade later, she was married, living in Rhode Island, and every now and then I'd be in the hallway or in my room and I'd hear it play again. Now, the woman is still alive, but it's still playing. So at any moment, anything we've ever done is recorded. It always is and always will be. You can't get away from it. Now, the question is why at certain times can people catch a glimpse of it? Some things you certainly don't want people to see replayed, private moments. But those are the things I ponder. And on ghost hunting theories, I discuss this a lot. I look for the science behind it. I try to understand a little bit better. The closer we reverse engineer ghostly activity, the more we realize it's not just one person, one spirit. It may not even be a spirit. It may be a whole lot of other things. And part of it, I think, being put on Earth as 3D biologic mortals, but we have a spirit. I think that there's something that aligns our spirit with the planet that we were put on or brought to. And so, the Earth can actually replay us in turbulent moments. I've been through lots of earthquakes when I lived in California, and I got to say, there was a lot of strange phenomena just beforehand. It opens up something. The Earth is part of the energy.
right. And with all your studies and everything, we kind of talked about like, aliens, being galactic and everything. A lot of people are starting to notice now, like solar weather having an impact here.
Yeah.
And so, do you feel like that can play part of why sometimes some locations or areas that have been kind of dormant may kick into action, or
Mhm.
that's already been active may up its game, so to speak? And we'll say like rain brings about more activity, rainstorms,
Mhm.
but could a solar storm be like a whole nother level, and they're utilizing that.
Um, well, we do know we see a lot of alien craft from volcanoes and electric storms, tornadoes, things like that. In fact, I had one researcher who was out filming. He was reviewing film of an F5 tornado, and the news crew was filming it in one location. They were just sitting there looking at this thing in the distance. And when this researcher went through the film, he broke it down frame to frame. And when the lightning struck, the perspective was from a whole other area, not the same location. So there's a lot of things that can, and I think we're seeing that on Skinwalker Ranch. There's a lot of things that are natural at work. There's things that maybe another culture that's more advanced is utilizing. If they don't have to deal with space and time like we do, they can do things that we wouldn't understand, like their craft. What the heck are they doing? And the encounters that I've had, I've gotten to witness how they leave. They have no technology on them. They literally are using their consciousness to turn into basically a plasma, a red-orange plasma light, and then they disappear. And it does create the smell of ozone, and it does create a temperature rise. And so I had to kind of go back and study, how is plasma formed? And these are the qualities in plasma. So how are they becoming a plasma and managing to transport themselves? I've explained that a little bit on ghost hunting theories, but it's an interesting science. When you start, and I know people don't like science because it kind of ruins the spiritual aspect, but even the spiritual aspect has to have some continuity, and that continuity would be how it actually does it. So I think we get closer to it when we start to explain it. Now we're down to quantum level. I mean, let's go back long ago. Black Plague, people were dying. They did not know why. They thought maybe they're not spiritually strong. Maybe they were born in the wrong month. Whatever. They did not know. But later on, hundreds of years later, we had microscopes. We discovered bacteria. We found a microbial world. And that tiny little bacteria no one was aware of or even could see could kill a person. Then we went into the atomic age, and we found that you split an atom and you can destroy a civilization. So imagine when you get even further down into quantum, that's what runs the whole system. And it's more powerful and more self-supporting and energetic. And those little nuances are what's, I think, handling a lot of the things we're experiencing.
Very true. And in your research, I'm kind of curious, because living in Arizona, I'm wondering because I came across like stories of giants that were in Nevada that were there and then they were gone, you
Yeah.
know, and they claim the Smithsonian was behind that. Whether they were or not, I don't know. It's just the fact remains it was in the papers. They had giants, then the giants were gone.
Yeah.
Did you ever get interested in stuff like that and be like,
Oh,
oh,
yeah.
I'm living right by there. Let's go check that out?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I have a whole series on the Grand Canyon mummies. Giants have been a huge part of my research, and I've learned of some places where there's still some mummies, but handling that with a team that does it the proper way, the respectful way, to document it live, but to not touch anything, just measure it, document it, and then hand it to the authorities, and then follow up and find out how it went missing. Who's in charge of this find, and keep nagging that person forever to show how things go missing. But originally, when they were first moving into the Americas and settling down, especially the 1700s, a lot of farmers and others dug up these skeletons, and there was no explanation. They just thought, oh, it's some weird Indian or some strange tribe or whatever. They didn't really consider what it was. So America had basically started the Department of Ethnicity. And what that department did was it would find these things, and then they built the Smithsonian to be connected to it. So anything that Department of Ethnicity found that was antiquities would go to the Smithsonian. So that just became a storehouse, basically, for anything that was found that couldn't be explained. But, we were also coming into a time where there was the, Trail of Tears. Indian reservations were being set up. We were making choices about what to do with the native people. Well, the native people have been all along telling us legends of, we didn't build these mounds, we didn't do mining, this isn't ours, the people here before us did it. Well, imagine that you've set up a whole infrastructure to segregate what you call the native people, and now there's actually another native people. So what do? You don't want to integrate them because, to you back then, they're savages. So we had a lot of different things going on. Darwin had come out with evolution. Religion was confused about what to do. The giants only validated the Bible after we just told people that they evolved. Like it was a perfect storm to hide giants. And Arizona had a lot. And if you start really looking at where they were found, they were mining areas, especially copper.
And so I'm curious your thoughts behind, like, our history books, will only tell us we're hundreds of years old, but there's evidence, like, George Mitrovic, for example, points out, copper mining was done in the Mississippi Valley in BC.
Mm-hmm.
Copper was no longer the uh, technology needed or resource needed, so they abandoned it. And we were left unattended,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak, for, several hundreds of years or centuries. And then all of a sudden, hey, we're back on the map by accident. And I often wonder, when we look at some of these things and, we're like, oh, there's these structures in specific places, like you mentioned, mummies in the Grand Canyon with Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Why
Yeah,
is it our history books are so don't want, and I know you can't really answer this, but I'm curious your
yeah.
opinion and research, why it's such a threat to go and say, hey, we have new information, we're going to rewrite the books.
Mm-hmm.
Here's our new history. America was populated in BC
Oh,
and
yeah.
was abandoned. Why is that such a controversial, like, oh, if you even mention that, you could lose credentials? It's like, really? We have the evidence right here.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I I look at it this way: there's like way too many things happening at once. Pretty much every indigenous peoples and the Bible, Gilgamesh, all of these things report the giant flood. We have found that there was something around, I think, 12,500, the Younger Dryas, when mammoths and all the larger animals went missing. And the giants, the evidence of the giants, they seem to have been living at that period of time. So, what happened to devastate everything all at once? The problem is, it takes it into the biblical realm, which science and education generally don't want to play in that playground. But when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. You have a people who were extremely advanced. There's pyramids around the world. Obviously, they 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 had the ability to go from shore to shore. They also had a much lower ocean, so there was less space between locations. And strangely, when the ice age melted and the oceans rose, when you talk about that kind of condition, of course, it's going to be bringing lots of flooding rains. And the question becomes, was it flooded to get rid of the Nephilim, which is what the biblical people will say, the offspring of angels mating with humans, becoming some sort of abomination that was cannibalistic and not pleasant, but very advanced? Um, just the fact that all that was wiped out and that we can't really find much evidence of. Now and then we find giant tools, evidence of ancient mining. We come across a body here and there. But you think about it, if you had a major flood that obliterated all of that and the ocean levels rose, you're not going to have a lot of their stuff left behind. You're not going to find anything made of wood. That would be gone. It all makes sense when you look at both legends and religion. But science cannot equate that there was something smarter than us here first. And there could have been many civilizations. In fact, in one of my encounters with rays, I looked at one of the graves. There were 4 of them in my room. And I looked at one of them and I looked it in the eyes, and suddenly, I don't know why, I just knew. I said, we're related, aren't we? And this thing's eyes just widened. I mean, they do have subtle expressions, but I felt this connection. I am you or me. And I don't know if that was a universal thing, that everything alive is connected, or if we literally, these guys are, our descendants.
Yeah, and that's a really hot topic right now about that,
Yeah.
and that's a controversial topic because I think a
Mhm.
lot of times some people like to think, oh, we're the best of the best, and we don't want to be part of the worst of the worst, or
Mhm. Yeah, and
and
we're created in God's image, and yeah, I totally get that. Well, if you think about
oh,
it,
and
let's say these aliens with the weird qualities they have, they probably would have been one of the first creatures that was intelligent here. What if they had advanced to a level that they could actually move on out of this plane, and then say another, like the reptilians during the dinosaur era, they did the same thing, and they were able to transport to the next level. What in the giants? Maybe they did the same. Could it be that these guys come back to see when we are close to being able to leap out of here? Now, that's a whole new thought.
it is, and I also like to point out, when I'll use the terms of the age, white man met the red man.
Hmm.
All the red men were viewed as savage and inferior, and were judged all by the first tribes that were met.
Hmm.
Well, there were tribes that were like the farmers, and they didn't hunt and attack anybody else, but we treated them just like they were the ones that roam around on the prairie and attack tribes and steal. And so
Yeah.
we have a habit of lumping everything into one giant picture. And I feel like when we talk about like the ETs or like Greys or Arcturians, we're like, oh, the Arcturians are this. It's like we don't
Yeah.
think of, oh, there's factions within factions,
Hmm.
and some good, some bad. And so I think that's a kind of humanistic thing that we do, and we need to watch, is that we don't lump some, because I was guilty of it, and I had to retrain
Oh,
my thinking to, oh, there are factions, and there
yeah.
could be rare good factions and what we think are the all bad factions.
And like
And
us,
so
there's both. Yeah. I mean, I look at it and I think, okay, the giants, they were very, very advanced, but not the way that we are now. And so we're arrogant in our technology, that makes us really advanced. So what I consider the giants to be is sort of the originals. They learned how to make amazing megalithic structures and canalways and do things that we can't, understand the stars and how to observe them. And they had a knowledge that was based on honestly earned. They were tied to the earth. They learned the physics of the earth and how to relate with it and how to use what's here. And they built these amazing structures. Then along comes man, and man goes, oh wow, cool, what's this, the sphinx, pyramid, all these cool things. Oh, I like their gadgets. So we became focused on technology, but we hadn't earned the knowledge of how that happened. And that came on a more spiritual and evolutionary level. Then you meet the native people of the Americas, the Amerindians, and you see that they're living what you consider feral. They don't, where's their technology? They're kind of crude. What we're missing is those spiritual people, those indigenous people who have wonderful legends, actually interacted with the giants. They saw how they did it. They understood what they were doing, and they used their knowledge, the same knowledge of the earth and the physics of life here, and they use that in a spiritual way to grow in that direction. So they focused on the spiritual aspects of the giants, We focused on the technology, and we're still hooked on technology, and it makes us arrogant brats in the universe because we think that means we're advanced. But if you look at people today, the more technology, the stupider we get.
Right. And one thing too that I have started pointing out with people is, we have to look at the language of the time where
Mm-hmm.
these stories originate from. And let's say, average height of someone in BC time, we'll say 5'4". Okay, so everyone's around 5'4". Well, now you meet someone who's 5'9", 6'5".
Mm-hmm.
What? How are they going to describe that person? That person's a giant.
Yeah.
Well, and so like you point out, we don't have many remains. We don't have many, visual aids to say, here's the giants. This is what they were. And
Mm-hmm.
so could it be simply these were just anomalous taller beings that, there was nothing special or unique really about them, but they were just taller and out of evolution
Yeah.
somehow? Because how do we explain people that are 5 feet giving birth to 6 feet 7 feet tall people now?
Mm-hmm.
There's no scientific rhyme or reason around it. But could it be, and I'm not saying all of them, but I'm saying, could a lot of these stories just be somebody who was a few inches tall, maybe 6 inches to a foot taller,
Mm-hmm.
and are like, "Oh my god, you're a giant! You're a giant!" And it's like, no, he's a man.
Yeah. Well, I guess I would look at the way, like, however, back then they buried or took care of their dead. Um, you would say you dig up one of their peers and you'd find a 5'4" skeleton and it's in a coffin that's decayed or whatever. Um, they're finding the giants, they're finding them not only in like huge stone sarcophagi, but also with copper implements, a lot of seashell stuff. They're obviously a different people, and they don't follow anything indigenous the way that the indigenous people handle things. So you have to say there's an outsider here. Somebody doesn't belong here. Uh, I lived in Arizona on top of what was the village of the dead, Muertes, and it was an ancient tribe long ago that went missing around, I don't know, 12 to 1400. They don't know what happened to them, but they had left canalways, and they had this huge area where they put their cremated and their buried remains. In the 1930s, they had archaeologists come in and start digging through this thing, and they found, they archived, there were Indians, and then there were this other race, another people, and they said another people because all of these people were buried together and they all had dolichocephalic heads, which were sort of bun shaped skulls. And so the attributes of just looking at them, they were different. So they knew there were two different races living here together. And those are the kinds of things that define the giant culture. How did you find it? Where did you find it? And what was it with?
Yeah, and that makes sense and everything. And I know, we talked. You mentioned Skinwalker Ranch, and I haven't stepped foot on there, but I do watch the show, and I'll admit I'm a little bit behind. Where I last watched the show, they were, trying to figure out what the anomaly above the property that was interfering with GPS and everything.
Yeah.
And they had bored tunnel one into the mesa and were
Mm-hmm.
trying to bore the other one. And I think they just got it, but it was smaller.
Yeah.
What do you think is going on with the ranch there? Are they, by activating, all these tests and pushing, equipment through the ground and making these holes in the ground, disturbing the natural resonance, and so portals are being opened and things are coming to say, what are you doing? Or are they just bringing awareness to what's already been going on there that
Yeah.
we were denied from, and it's all we think coincidental?
Yeah, I mean, and I know it'd be handling this a little differently than they are because, I mean, obviously they have a site that's active, but the question is it like that everywhere? I mean, if you just go down the street around the corner and you start testing, doing the same test, are you going to find similar weirdness? Uh, all we know is this one's had a lot of attention on it, a lot of equipment on it, a lot of testing. I think I would add to what they're doing there, and I would say, let's do something of a more spiritual nature. Let's bring in, Stephen Greer's CE5, where you call upon UFOs. How about more tribal people to come and shamans? How about, psychics? Let's stimulate it with the human aspect, the spiritual aspect. And if we find there's a tie, we're not only helping to understand the land, but also how humans interact with the land and its phenomena. So it's like a win win. You're learning two whole new things. And it's consciousness. It always goes back, I think, to consciousness. Those aliens, they had to think really hard, they had to focus themselves to actually disappear and leave. And that seems to be how they run their vehicles as well. And I think we're finally tapping in with quantum research that consciousness is important. There was a double slit exam that the experiment that showed shooting photons through these slots. They would make a certain pattern, but the minute you observe the test, you change the outcome. Now that's consciousness. Humans have the ability to do. We are, like they say, we are God. God is us, and we haven't figured that out. But ancient people certainly knew it, and I think Skinwalker Ranch is a good experiment.
It is, and they actually had a show. I don't know if it's still active, beyond Skinwalker Ranch, where they
Yeah.
sent two people out to outlying areas, and it was interesting. You know how you talk about testing to see if it happens outside. That they did go to a ranch, and I want to kind of say Bradshaw Ranch, but I may have the wrong ranch in mind. On
Bradshaw's the
the
one in Arizona, yeah. And I think the other one
yeah,
was at Mount Wilson or something like that. I think that
yeah.
was a very active one. Yeah, very
But when
similar.
they were there, they were like, "We're getting the same activity
Mm-hmm.
as the guys at Skinwalker Ranch are getting."
Yeah,
It's like the
yeah,
land was reacting the exact same way,
yeah. And I'm
and that was
surprised they don't.
confusing them.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't understand why a geologist on there, and they also have somebody in the oil and I was in the oil and gas business. You need to have them there too. They have all the equipment to look for gamma rays and to understand and is anything happening in your oil fields because that ranch is completely surrounded by hundreds of oil fields. The shale is very prevalent there, and I would think that they're having issues where they are too, and they need to interview them and they need to use their knowledge and their geologists. There's a lot of components to see other than Travis shooting rockets every 5 minutes. I'm so tired of that. When I see them studying the sky, I think it's like you throw a rock in a pond. You're focused on the ripples, going, "Wow, look at that! All these ripples are happening. Oh, let's measure them. Let's see." You're missing what caused the ripples, and it's the rock. And I think they need to focus more on the mesa and less on the effects.
I kind of agree, and I will mention, you mentioned Blind Frog Ranch in your
Mhm.
bio and topics, and I have mixed feelings about that one, and I haven't watched any of the shows or really done any research around it because I hear so many mixed reviews of what's going on there. Some people say, "Oh, it's active," and other people say, "Oh, it's somewhat active, but it's more been televised, more for
Yeah,
television time." And so I'm
yeah.
kind of curious, with your perspective and your, viewpoint, how do you look at it and go, "Hey, yeah, there's a lot of activity here," or do you go, "Well, that seems more TV sensationalized, and so yeah, I'm not gonna give it really much more energy."
Yeah, it kind of reminds you of like if you were out like tracking a tracking a wild pig somewhere and you're following the path and you're looking for its footprints and you're looking for broken branches and you're smelling the air and you're trying to find this pig. And I feel like at Blind Frog they're so focused on just the fortune, and I think it's Discovery Channel's problem. I wish History Channel had handled it, because if you go into Gaia, there's a two-part interview with Dwayne Ollinger where he discussed purely the alien and UFO aspects that do not come onto the show at all. It's just a treasure hunting show. So Discovery saw, oh, this is more sensational. This is more, let's stick with the treasure. Let's see if they get the treasure. Let's watch them in trouble in a cave. Let's see it cave in. I can just see the titillation of that. But they're missing a lot of things. When Dwayne had, well, they've run into dire wolves, the strange snake that apparently is an ancient snake. All of this stuff comes from the underground there. And now, as they get closer and closer to what they think is where the treasure is, they're describing characteristics that, as a person who's deeply studied in ancient giants, the staircase, the giant door, though, and in the mining area and gold, are all ancient giant factors. And Utah probably had more ancient giant artifacts and caverns than anywhere else. And so I think they think they're going after, an Aztec treasure or maybe a Mormon treasure. But I think it goes a lot deeper than that, and it might surprise them.
And I kind of have an interesting scientific question, and I'm not well versed in science, I'll admit, and I'm more of history.
Mm-hmm.
But when we talk about like dire wolves,
Mm-hmm.
those are wolves that went extinct before man really like got in the area and everything. So when we say, "Oh yeah, this is genetically, could be genetically a dire wolf," where did we get the genetic? Where did we get the dire wolf's DNA when it's been extinct long before we showed up? And it's like, and how do we know that's that
Well,
DNA?
all of those creatures from that megalithic era, all of those guys they're all documented. At least what they found in remains that they've been able to get the DNA out of. And I think they understand from the skeletons as well that this is a canid and it's this size and the jaw looks like this, and so that makes it a dire wolf. Uh, well, I have my own theory on how the West became a desert. Now, long ago, after the Ice Age, when the water was melting, we had lakes in Death Valley. We had gigantic lakes. We had, the Bonneville Lake in Utah, Lake Lahontan in Nevada, giant lakes everywhere. And that created a lot of life and attention. And I think a lot of the giants were around those areas. Now, the Paiutes even say in Death Valley, when lakes were there long ago, there were great people that came on boats and lived there on the lakes. And when the lakes began to dry up, they went underground. And then, according to them, they instead of using a ship, they used some sort of a silver vessel that they flew in, which is kind of interesting. But what we find is the lakes, people assume it got hot in the West and that dried the lakes out. That makes absolutely no logical sense. There's no reason why it got hot here. The only reason it gets hot is the water's gone. Now, why is the water gone? We have the Pacific Plate, we have the Walker Plate, we have tons of seismic activity. And around the world, there's been other lakes that drained almost overnight because seismic activity. So what we have is potentially either Mount Shasta exploded, created even more, tectonics going on, seismic activity, or just simply earthquakes in the West. And when those plates move, it could have caused fissure and all that water drained out. Now, when the water drained out, there was a civilization that went, uh-oh, where are we going to go? So you have megalithic creatures like the dire wolf or that strange snake, and you have these giant people. They're all going to go underground where the water is. They're going to follow the source. Now they've had, thousands of years to adapt there. Maybe occasionally they come out and wander around, but that's their territory. That's where the water is. And we do more and more evidence of that. And you see that on Blind Frog Ranch. Every time they try to do something on there, it floods. Where's the water coming from? So That's and then the water's gone, the west heats up,
Right.
and it's you naturally follow the resources.
And even Skinwalker Ranch, they did an episode where they were pumping water from one end to another end, but it never went to the other end. And they were like, but they could never find where the water was. It's like it
Exactly.
just vanished. And
Yeah.
I think
See, and
another
that's
thing
another. Yeah. Yeah.
I
I
was
was
going to
going to
say,
say, from the oil and gas industry, that was another thing. When we would map, we would do logarithms, and we would know where the water tables were and where what kind of water was under there. You don't want to drill in water that's just going to, screw your whole venture. So you have to look for the gamma rays, and you have to look for the water levels. And I think if they brought in a crew, I mean, these guys are in the oil and gas industry. They should have had a crew come in and do logarithms. They could have told them right away, "Hey, look at this graph." I mean, I read those graphs. That's how we find the sweet spot when we drill. So I'm surprised they didn't utilize that, being in the industry.
or they may have, and History Channel for
Yeah,
sensationalism was like, let's not use that info and,
yeah,
kind of do this in a safer way. And so that's why when like they're exposed to the gamma, it's not, they don't burst a pocket and everyone's like deathly sick. It's like, oh, we got microdosed. Okay, we're okay. But wow,
yeah,
who knew that was there? It's like, well, yeah.
yeah. I mean, they're smart enough at least to have a geologist on hand, which I appreciate that. But I don't know that much about his study and what his focus was, and what I've seen him use certain equipment, ground penetrating radar and stuff. But I mean, it just seems to make sense to go looking. They had mapped out where the caves were, the caverns were. They should have been, looking at the water levels.
Well, and I also think, like going back about like the dire wolf and how, I was surprised, we have samples because when you listen to the quote experts talking about it, they make it sound like these are things out of myths and legends and, like dragons, you could say, it would be like a dragon. Well, I don't know anywhere where I can say, hey, let's go over to England on this mountain and there's a cave where there's dragon bones and we know that they're there. And so that's why I naturally, when I hear it, from the TV, I don't go any further because I'm like, oh, it's a legend.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
Well, I mean, we
And
have
so
museums that have the whole skeletons assembled, and that's great. But I'm not pleased with museums in general. I appreciate that they're trying to preserve things and show them to us. They're trying to direct our attention, but then they also have this little plaque that tells you about the thing, and that education is almost always totally screwed, and it's also cued a certain way so that you look at this thing and they told you what you're looking at, and you can't ask questions about that because they're making it fact, and
right.
a lot of what they're saying is just absolutely hokum. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a location near where I live, and I got in a beef with a friend over it because it's a place called Dinosaur Valley. It's a
Oh.
it's a park, and they have a famous spot where in the stone cast it looks like a human print right next to a dinosaur print. And they're like, wait a minute, if this is real, this is redefining, when humans arrived, because we know when dinosaurs left,
Yeah.
were they side by side? And my friend who was like a ranger there and tour guide and everything was like, that's not a footprint. It's actually a lot of dinosaur prints that made it look like a human print. And I'm like, okay, I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But then in the back of my mind, I'm still thinking, though, hey, if, that is really a human print next to a dino print, shows like Dinotopia, where we were coexisting together, could
Yeah.
that be real somewhere? And, we have shows like Land of the Lost, where, an island that's been hidden is now, people stumbled on, and you have humans living with creatures that are supposed to be extinct. And
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's a human nature to think, wouldn't it be cool? We love dinosaurs. We should have been with them. Now, I think the oldest so far we found of any kind of a human relative that's like very human, it was like around 1 million years old, I think, in Asia. I think it might have been China. I'm not sure. But I don't think we would line up. And I guess my reasoning for that is if they were obliterated and all of the megafauna and megaflora were obliterated, we would have been too. We certainly are less hardy than anything. In fact, we're not even built for the earth. So we would not have made it. How did we continue on? I think they played out their own time and their own conditions. And I think there was something different about either gravity or oxygen or the earth that made everything so much bigger. And then things changed. Some people say, well, they brought the moon in and that changed everything. I don't know. I have no idea. I like the idea the moon is, some kind of a satellite that was designed, but it's an intriguing one. But I mean, something obviously changed. And then here we go again. Why museums frustrate me and science and educational system. Actually, the government, religion, and education, they have agendas and they want to be the one that's right. And so you hear them say the dinosaurs died overnight. Some of them still had food in their stomach, so it had to have been an asteroid. Okay, and then another scientific group comes along and says, no, birds today evolved from dinosaurs. So make up your mind. Are they gone? Did they evolve? And even they can't. They can't get funding if they don't say what their educational system wants them to say. So I question everything, and then I question the answers.
Well, and my favorite thing to point out to people when they say, there's no evidence, religion even tells us, there's no evidence of anything before man. I go,
Hmm.
excuse me,
The 6,000 years, yeah.
you know the Adam and Eve story, right? And they go, well, yeah, I said Adam and Eve had two sons, Cain and Abel. What happened after they left Eden? And they go, well, humanity came. I was like, yeah, but what was the verbiage? And they go, what do you mean? I said, the Bible says Cain and Abel married women from other tribes. Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel were the only people on the planet. So where are these other
Yeah.
tribes? What are these other tribes?
And didn't one of the brothers kill the other brother? So yeah, there's even
Right.
less chances. I know. Yeah, a lot of
And
things
it's
come
like, we
along.
got two males. So, we're not reproducing. And so,
Yeah.
wait a minute. How, there's a major discrepancy in this
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
And
I have a
how,
lot. I mean, I'm a Christian. I have a lot of respect for biblical records and any religious records or even legends by the native people. But I think long ago, before we had written language, we just had oral traditions, and Indians would pass things down to each other. But if you just pass down, yeah, your uncle liked to laugh a lot, and he helped the tribe. That's not going to get passed down. That's not
right.
a story. As a screenwriter, I wouldn't even write a play like that. So um, what I think happened was they had to create sensationalism for it to get passed down. So now they go from, your uncle, your uncle, or how about this one? Grandma. Grandma likes to bake jam. No one's going to pass that down. That's just tedious. And so they say, Grandma made jam out of children. You're going to pass that down. Oh, yeah. And your kid's going to pass that down. Then what happened is at a time when we had writing and we had ways to actually document things, then we went into that Gilgamesh and biblical area. And that's where they still, I don't know if you remember watching like early movies or early TV, they still staged it as if it was on a play at a theater. The way they
Right.
shot it, the way the people move, the way they talk. So what we have is these people that all they've known is oral tradition. Now they have to put it into words. So now we're finding these stories that are very sensational, trying to tell us something important, but they're still using that concept of it has to get passed down and putting the extraordinary in it. So, when people say, well, really, was there an ark? And, to whatever, how did he get koala bears? They weren't where he was, like there's a lot of people that just have trouble with these concepts. And I like to see people open up with that and, say, yeah, what they're trying to tell us was there was a flood that obliterated almost everything and some survived. and maybe the ones that survived were God's choice, but it, you know, it didn't have to be there was a vehicle or two of every animal and hay and feed and you know, all that stuff. But it makes sense when you look at it in the way that man evolved from oral traditions to written traditions.
Well, and what's interesting too is like the story of the ark. They just tell us Noah made an ark. It doesn't actually specify what material he used. They give us the cubit size, and so part of me goes, we're assuming Noah was a human in the first place. They never really specify,
Although it's hundreds of years old, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And so I like the notion that somebody pointed out and goes, maybe this ark was a scientific vessel and they took the DNA of male and female of all the animals, and that's how there was two of everything. And when the flood happened, they landed when the water subsided, and we're like, okay, reintroduce.
Mhm.
Here's your genetic strands. Go back and populate and go forth.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
it's like
yeah, and
that
that
makes
time, yeah.
more sense than putting lions with sheep with elephants and going
And was Bigfoot a stowaway? Because I don't think they could find him and grab him.
right.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, and it is a playful thing to think of, and it's a cute concept. When I was a kid, I think I had an ark with all the little creatures. But yeah, I like that idea that it's like a library. And I think back then, technology wasn't a thing. So how do you explain? It had a vessel it carried
Right.
samples, and we found
And
that with the Grand Canyon mummies that we were talking about. One of the things that the guy found back in the cave with all the mummies was samples of all their seeds. You know, they had a devastating event and they archived all their seeds.
and how would they even know to do that? That's another interesting question is, we don't archive or back anything up until an event happens and we're like, oh crap, if I
Well,
go,
actually,
this goes,
it's
I need
yeah.
to back this up.
We've done a pretty good job at that, though as a humanity. I know that like films, important those are in caves with humidity level and temperature levels in case something happens. So in Europe, they have the
Right.
seed catalog of all the seeds that are kept in a cold house down underground. So we got smart. Something told us, what if? And then there's other people like, maybe Elon Musk that say, well, we need to put our seed out there in space. We need to live on another planet if we want to continue. And that's why a lot of us look back and go, are we Martians? Like, was Mars going down? Technology, and they came to this planet where there was water, and that I mean that could be the case. Maybe we're just reliving history over and over, and they do say history repeats.
Right. And the interesting thing about history is, I never thought about it, being, we just call it history.
Mhm.
And when I was out, admittedly, I was looking at a channel that came on, and it's called Story, and it's a story channel where they tell stories.
Mhm.
And I looked at it, and all of a sudden, it's like my brain goes, his story. History is his story. Oh, history
Yeah.
is just stories. No wonder it repeats. Is we're
Yeah.
telling the same story again, and we're
Mhm.
reliving the same story, different actors, different area,
Yeah.
but same story. And I'm like, interesting. And so it's like, yeah. Then I started looking at things and going, yeah, this really is just a story, and this really is this.
Mhm.
Would explain why this is happening and this is happening, and it's like the world seems to make more sense somehow
Yeah.
because we're looking at it as a story than, oh well, we
Mhm.
have this event. Well, what caused that event? I don't know. Look at
Mhm.
this event and look at this event. But if we look at it all as a fluid story, you get a different picture.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I look at One of my encounters, one of the things that came across in the thought process between us was that the people on Earth are of extreme interest because civilizations that did go the technological route and really did evolve to break time, break space, to be able to do the impossible, they had to do it collectively. And so they lost a lot of individuality. They come to Earth, and it's like watching a play with 8 billion characters. They're all able to do whatever they want, but collectively, it's hard for them to go anywhere because they're not all working for the same purpose. So we're really an interesting creature to study.
Yeah. And I like to say Shakespeare was like one of the first whistleblowers, so to speak, of our reality because he famously made the statement, the world is but a stage and we're but merely the actors upon it. And it's
Yeah.
like, that's kind of like what we're starting to realize is
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
all actors on this stage of life. And
Yeah. And I think a beautiful way of looking at it now, I'm a person who has lost almost everyone from a huge family and friends, and a lot of them went early. So I've had to really have a good understanding of the flow of life. I'm extremely exalted that they have gotten their reward and they shed the skin and they really went to what they're supposed to do. But I also think that while we're here, one of the really interesting things people say, well, why do babies die young? And why does this person have illness? And why do we have a war? Well, if you are, let's go with the God concept. If we all can agree that there is something that created us, if you were to do this experiment, but you are divine, you're not of flesh and blood, you don't understand what it's like to be stuck in a mortal body and think that's all there is, and have to fight for food and shelter and mating and procreating and all the things that go with it, you'd have to send down representatives, recorders. We all come down, we all live different lives, different ways, and it shows the collective knowledge when we return. The divine becomes more understanding of the creation because there's so many trillions and you can't even count the numbers of ways a life can be led. So we're really little troops. We come back, we're rewarded, and we add to the collective knowledge.
yeah, exactly. I agree with that. And
Yeah.
I think that's really profound. And I actually have to say, I have been enjoying this
Mhm.
conversation so
Yeah.
much, I lost track of the time. And we're like almost an hour and 40 minutes. And I'm like,
Yeah,
what?
I know. I mean, I could talk this all night, but yeah, I think the listeners need a break.
Well, and I was going to ask one last question, if I may.
Mhm.
You talk about being screenwriter and filmmaker.
Mhm.
What got you to, seeing like, oh, I could write and make these films and, leave a print behind, or decide,
Yeah.
oh, all these adventures, why don't I make a movie and put them into movie form?
Yeah. From a very young age, I think like probably the first alien encounter, really, about 3 or 4 years old. Right around there, I started thinking, I know I'm going to be a writer. I know I'm going to do something with film, but I don't know what. So I took years of acting later on. I did lots of writing. I did books. I did my blog. And I had this unfulfilled thing where I just felt I was given a job to go and make something in a visual that I could show to people, and it would change their thought process or their feelings, or they'd feel like they're understood. And I go back to the encounter I had when I was told what my mission was by the little gray people. Um, what it worked out in my head, it came out as find the schism between the worlds, open and close the door at will in front of witnesses. And I thought that is like the weirdest thing to ask of me. I don't know. That sounds really big, really important, and I'm just a regular person. So I thought, why me? Well, I was given a vehicle. What's my vehicle? The written word and communication. And so I ended up joining a group, a film group, and evolved very quickly to write the scripts. And then it grew even bigger into major film stuff. And I'm in a variety of genres. I don't. I'm open to anything. I do documentaries. I have a western we're about to film, historic. I'm writing right now. I'm finishing up the edit on a horror film, a ghost story. So I feel like reaching people in that form, it talks to the people that are present now that need a visual. Um, you can write a book, but barely anyone's going to read it. Uh, People just don't have the attention span, and I don't blame them. I mean, look at how stimulating the internet is. You know, you can go on YouTube, you can go on TikTok, you can, you're all over the place.
Yeah.
So, but people will still sit down and watch a film, and they're changed by it. And I take that responsibility really seriously. I have a strange way of looking at things, so I can add something new. But ultimately, I want them to walk away and come to their own conclusion. I never want people to accept the way I see things or the conclusions I make. I want them to get into the thought process. I'll give them the resources. Go chase it. Go find how you think it goes. You don't have to have my way of seeing it. Mine is a combination of what I studied, what I focused on, what I felt, how I was raised, and they have their own conclusions. So with film, I want to do the same thing. You walk away and it affected you in a different way.
No, that's beautiful. And
Yeah.
one last thing I would ask then is, with your background and everything that you have accomplished and done,
Mm.
what advice would you give to either your younger self and or anyone who's coming up in the world now that may have like similar interest and not know what to do with it?
Yeah, I always tell people, especially when you're studying, the unexplained, why are you in it? Are you hoping for a show? Are you doing it because you had an encounter and you want to explain it? Or do you want to prove that it exists? You need to know your agenda when you go in, because certain agendas are going to hit dead ends. In research, if you think you already know what it is, then you're not going to go anywhere. You're going to take all your evidence and you're going to form it to prove what you believe. And the belief really should be the result of the evidence. So try to be open minded. I was really humbled. I didn't think Bigfoot had any paranormal qualities. Now I'm absolutely certain they're able to do something that we don't know. We can't explain yet, but there's something very unusual about them. So I say, when I was younger, I wish someone had told me that there are no obstacles in your path. The obstacles are the path. So you may set out wanting to do something and life gets in the way. And then years, maybe decades go by. And then you finally go back to it. But you go back to it at the point at which is optimal. So there is an intelligence, not a fate, but an intelligence nudging you. I'm going to put crap in your way, make you go a different direction. I'm going to keep making this hard. Just go that way. And it eventually, if you just blindly follow the obstacles, they lead to the destination. So don't ever get frustrated or give up. I'm one of those people that, I'm not kidding. I went through financial ruin trying to get to this point, and I stayed when anyone else would have left, and they would never have won. It's like, if you don't play the lottery, you can't win. Well, if you don't stick it out through all the crap, make all the sacrifices, and have everyone around you not believe in you or say, "Why are you doing this?" If you have to do it. It's like the trials of Job. You eventually get rewarded, but boy, they put Job through a lot. And you just have to believe in the thing more than the comforts of, if it puts you in a financial ruin or ruins a relationship. These are the things that are going to happen, and if you can't sacrifice those, then you can't get the reward. It sucks, but it makes you more mature.
I agree, and thank you for that. That's a
Mhm.
really
Yeah.
wonderful answer. And I want to leave the show with a message for you, Sharon.
Okay.
And that is, from my heart and the heart of my shows to you. Thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's seen, felt, heard, and appreciate
Yeah.
so much you being your authentic self and sharing that with us.
Oh, good. Well, yeah, and I open and close the door at will in front of witnesses at Ghost Hunting Theories. So really anything that like hit a note with you, go on there and in the search bar, put down that subject and you're going to find a ton of content on it. And like I said, keep pursuing your own take on it. You don't have to have my take.
Right, and I think that's one of the beauties of, how your work is it's like my goal with my shows is I'm presenting an idea,
Yeah.
and if it resonates with you, run with it and research it more. And if it doesn't, simply watch another episode or,
There you go.
go
Yeah.
to a different host. I have no, like, you have to watch my stuff only. I'm like, no, if, this one doesn't resonate with you,
Yeah.
unfortunate, but it's going to happen. And so you'll find one, I'm sure, that does. And if not, I hope you do find one that does. And so that's
Yeah.
the way I operate.
Yeah, we need lots of curious people. Yeah.
Yeah. And so be sure to follow Sharon on her site and her adventures and follow along on my shows, because you never know when she may be back on, and she is welcome back on anytime. And I've
Thanks.
enjoyed this conversation.
It's been great. You're a wonderful host. You really know stuff. I love that.
Well, thank you. I try my best to kind of stay versed in a few things here and there. And if something piques my interest, I like to talk to somebody about it and take on their viewpoint and be like, hey, does that resonate somewhat with mine idea that I had?
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you for having me on.
And so everyone that's in the US, this message goes to you. Happy 4th of July weekend coming. Have a wonderful week and weekend, and we will see you all in the next episodes. Bye-bye, everyone. Just kidding. Here we go.